Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a close look at the life and the incredible legacy of Yves Saint Laurent.
Known to the world, of course, as YSL.
Exactly. And this is a story that has everything. It's about explosive genius, high-stakes Parisian fashion. But it's also about a really profound personal struggle that, in the end, shaped the very architecture of modern style.
It really did. And the sources we're looking at today are remarkable. They all confirm his status, not just as a designer, but as a true cultural revolutionary.
I mean, the big claim, we always hear, is that he created the modern woman's wardrobe.
It's an extraordinary claim, and it's one that really warrants a deep examination of what he actually did piece by piece.
And it wasn't just fashion insiders saying this. The establishment recognized it very early on. We talk about milestones, but this one is, well, it's huge.
You're talking about the Met.
The Met. YSL was the first living designer ever to be honored with this solo exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. That was back in 1983.
Which is just a clear statement from the art world, isn't it? It says his work belongs alongside the great masters of history. It wasn't just, ephemeral seasonal fashion. It was art.
So what was it that made his work so different, so transformative?
Well, it was his refusal to accept the old rules. The old rules of couture said that clothing had to be rigid, restrictive, almost architectural in a way that confined the body.
Right.
His genius was blending true comfort, which was a totally radical concept for high fashion, with this incredible elegance.
How did he do that?
He was constantly engaged with global culture. He was integrating non-European references. And something that was really important, he consistently chose and showcased diverse models. He had a much, much broader vision of what beauty and femininity could be.
His insight was that fashion couldn't just be about fantasy anymore. It had to serve the reality of a changing world, a world with new women in it.
Exactly.
And if we have to pick one single moment, one design where that shift became undeniable, it has to be the tuxedo suit for women.
The smoking. 1966. It is impossible to overstate its impact.
It really is.
It wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a defiant, beautiful weapon against prescribed gender norms.
A weapon, that's a good way to put it.
Think about it. He took the most formal, the most structured symbol of masculine power, the tuxedo, and he completely repurposed it for the empowered modern woman. It just instantly became the emblem of a whole new era.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. Our mission now is to trace the path of this revolution. And we have to start with the origins of the man himself, which were, a long way from the runways of Paris.
Very far. Colonial North Africa.
Let's unpack that early journey, starting in Oran, Algeria.
Yves Saint Laurent was born there in 1936. His parents were French, part of that European settler community often called the Pieds Noirs.
The Blackfeet.
Right. And the sources mention his family also had some Spanish heritage. He grew up in a really comfortable villa right by the Mediterranean with his two younger sisters, Michelle and Brigitte.
What's so fascinating in the earliest accounts is that his drive to create seems to have been immediate. It was just intrinsic to who he was.
Oh, absolutely. This wasn't a passion he discovered in college or later in life. We're talking about a boy creating these incredibly intricate paper dolls. And by his early teens, he was already designing clothes for his mother and his sisters.
So the foundational language of his artistic expression, it was already there. It was established right in his childhood home.
And that innate talent found formal validation very, very quickly. In 1953, he's still a young man. He submits his sketches to a competition for aspiring designers. It was sponsored by the International Wool Secretariat, the IWS.
And he won.
He won first place, and that victory earned him a crucial invitation to Paris.
Once he gets to Paris, he's immediately recognized by the gatekeepers of the fashion world.
The editor-in-chief of French Vogue at the time, Michel de Brunhoff, saw YSL's raw talent. He was the one who encouraged him to pursue design professionally. Paris wasn't just an education for him, it was basically a stage that was already set for his explosive entrance.
And he enrolled in the Chambre syndicale de la haute couture.
And, maybe unsurprisingly, he graduated at the top of his class. He even entered that IWS competition again and won a second time.
And this is where we see the historical significance, right? Because in winning, he beat two other notable names.
He did. He famously surpassed both his friend Fernando Sanchez and a contemporary, a young German designer named Karl Lagerfeld.
It's amazing. It's already foreshadowing these complex professional relationships that would define the rest of his life.
It's clear he possessed this acknowledged, almost intuitive genius.
Mhm.
And that led him directly into the highest possible arena, the House of Dior.
And de Bruynhoff was the one who made that happen.
Yes, he brokered this incredible opportunity. The story is that he saw YSL's sketches, and he was just stunned by how closely they resembled Christian Dior's own unreleased concepts.
Yeah.
He was convinced that YSL had this deep, almost subconscious understanding of couture, so he sent him straight to Dior. And the master designer, he was equally impressed. He hired him instantly. That was June 1955.
It's the opportunity of a lifetime.
Yeah.
But the source material reminds us that he starts, as is the tradition in these immense fashion houses, on very mundane tasks.
Of course. You have to pay your dues. He spent his first year decorating the studio, designing accessories, things like that. It wasn't until 1956 that his own sketches began to be integrated into the main couture collections.
But even then, even within the confines of Dior's structure, you can see his future themes starting to emerge.
Oh, you can. You look at the smock tops and the safari jackets that appeared in Dior's 1957 Libre line. They were the nascent forms of the utilitarian, comfortable elegance that would later define his own independent house.
He was planting the seeds of his own revolution while still under Dior's mentorship.
Absolutely. And YSL himself confirmed how deep that learning was. He said very simply, Dior taught me the basis of my art.
And then comes this moment of just devastating transition. In August 1957, Christian Dior actually tells YSL's mother that he sees her son as his successor.
And just 2 months later, in October, Christian Dior dies, suddenly. A massive heart attack. He was only 52.
Imagine the pressure. At 21 years old, Saint Laurent is abruptly elevated. He's now the head designer for the world's most influential, most profitable fashion house.
It's an almost unfathomable degree of responsibility to thrust upon a young man who was, by all accounts, already incredibly sensitive.
So his debut collection, it had to be perfect, not just creatively, but financially. The house depended on it.
And it was. His spring 1958 collection, the Trapeze line, was based on Dior's earlier 1955 A-line, but YSL transformed the silhouette.
Can you break that down? What was the technical difference?
Well, Dior's A-line was narrow at the shoulder, and then it flared out moderately at the hem, forming a very defined A-shape. It was still quite structured.
Okay.
YSL's trapeze line, however, it created a much softer, more flowing silhouette. It began closer to the bust and just hung away from the body. It offered this liberation of movement that the A-line didn't. It was a subtle but really profound change.
And the result was?
An immense critical and commercial success.
The sources stated pretty unequivocally. The Trapeze collection almost certainly saved the enterprise from financial ruin. The headlines were enormous. Saint Laurent has saved France.
I mean, can you imagine? He was catapulted to this undeniable international fame overnight.
But the relentless cycle of couture, combined with the expectations that were set by that first triumph, it proved incredibly difficult to maintain.
His subsequent Dior collections faced intense scrutiny. The hobble skirts of fall 1959, which narrowed sharply at the knee, they were seen as retrogressive, as restricting.
A step backwards.
Exactly. And then the beatnik fashions of fall 1960. This was a really dramatic, dark look. Black leather, exaggerated silhouettes.
That's crest.
The press savaged it. They thought it was too extreme, too far from the Dior elegance they expected.
And right as he's facing this professional criticism, the hammer of personal crisis falls.
In 1960, at the height of the Algerian War, a conflict that was intensely personal for a pied noir like YSL, he was conscripted into the French army.
He lasted only 20 days in basic training.
Just 20 days. The stress, the shock of that transition from the couture world and the hazing he was subjected to in that military environment, it was just too much for his delicate health.
It led to his immediate admission to a military hospital.
And while he's in this state of distress, hospitalized and totally vulnerable, he gets the news.
The crushing news that he had been fired from Dior. The house, eager to get back to stability, had replaced him with Marc Bohan.
So this professional rejection, layered on top of the extreme mental strain of conscription and the hazing, it triggered a complete breakdown.
The sources really underline this. This moment, the military and professional crisis of 1960, is the absolute pivot point for understanding the man.
It really is. He was transferred to the Val-de-Grâce military hospital, and the treatment he received there was, well, by today's standards, it was deeply concerning and, frankly, brutal.
It's essential here that we acknowledge the severity of the institutional trauma that was inflicted on him during this period. We have to handle this with sympathy.
Absolutely. The documentation is clear. He was administered extremely large doses of sedatives and psychoactive drugs. And even more distressing, He was subjected to electroshock therapy.
These were not gentle treatments. They were punitive and deeply invasive.
And this experience just devastated him. The source material explicitly notes that YSL herself, looking back much later in his life, traced the origin of both his lifelong severe mental health problems, chronic depression, anxiety, and his later addictions to drugs and alcohol directly back to this traumatic time in that military hospital.
She realized the foundation of a legacy so magnificent was built upon this institutional abuse.
Yeah.
Abuse that was forced on him during a moment of maximum vulnerability. It just reframes the immense personal cost of his genius.
He was, for the rest of his life, perpetually battling demons that were born from that experience.
It makes his return and everything that came after not just remarkable, but an act of almost superhuman defiance against a pain that was constantly threatening to overwhelm him.
It does.
Okay, let's turn now to part 2. The founding of the YSL House and the truly revolutionary 1960s, where he somehow transformed that trauma into groundbreaking, lasting art.
So, after he was released from the hospital in November 1960, his first move was a decisive one. He took legal action.
He sued Dior.
He successfully sued the House of Dior for breach of contract, and he secured a substantial settlement which gave him the financial capital he needed to launch his own venture.
And then, in 1961, the foundation of the house is cemented. This is the critical partnership between YSL and the industrialist Pierre Bergé.
Exactly. Together, they co-founded his eponymous house, Yves Saint Laurent, YSL.
The backing came from an American millionaire, J. Mac Robinson, and others. So there was immediate confidence in his vision, even after the recent setbacks.
And what's really crucial here, and the sources emphasize this, is the immediate fierce loyalty he inspired. Many of his most skilled artisans and staff from Dior immediately left to join him at the new house.
That's a huge vote of confidence.
It was essential. This swift migration provided the new house with established top-tier haute couture craftsmanship right from day one.
So his debut independent collection in 1962, the reviews were mixed.
A little bit. Some felt he was still a bit too reliant on Dior's influence. But he did get recognition for the excellence of his tailoring and for an early use of geometric cutouts.
But it was the second collection that really announced his arrival.
Yes. Fall 1962. That was the moment of his full independent declaration. It was celebrated as his strongest work since the trapeze line at Dior. He fully embraced the spirit of the Parisian left bank.
What did that look like?
It was things like Indian-inspired evening wear, these incredibly sophisticated versions of utilitarian pea coats, and the fisherman's smock. This collection confirmed his position as a master in his own right.
The 1960s were really where he solidified his role as a lightning rod for cultural change. He was so intensely aware of international youth culture.
Everything, from the mod looks on London's King's Road to the burgeoning hippie movement coming out of the U.S., he saw it all.
He became the ultimate interpreter.
That's a great way to put it. He didn't invent the youth trends, but he translated them into high fashion. He made them luxurious, desirable, and attainable for a wealthy international clientele.
So we see that translated into the beatnik look in 1962.
And through his collaboration with the shoe designer Roger Vivier, you get those dramatic thigh-high boots in 1963 and then platform shoes in 1967.
And he took utilitarian clothing, the pea coat, the smock, and he elevated them into timeless classics. The safari jacket from 1967 is the perfect example.
It is. It was originally created as a striking one-off for a Vogue photo essay, but it just immediately became synonymous with this kind of sophisticated adventure.
His deep connection to the fine arts also produced one of his most recognized lines.
The 1965 Mondrian collection, those stark, color-blocked shift dresses.
It felt like his artistic response to what was happening elsewhere in fashion.
It was. It was a kind of engagement with the architectural, almost space-age designs that André Courreges was presenting around the same time. Courreges was all about precision and geometry in the structure of the garment itself.
Right.
YSL responded by applying the precise geometry of abstract painting, specifically Piet Mondrian's, to a flowing, wearable garment. He turned fashion into portable high art.
But maybe his most profound structural contribution was this idea of democratizing fashion. He was the first French couturier to fully commit to launching a full-scale, parallel pret-a-porter line. ready to wear.
This was a genuine revolution against the elitism of haute couture. I mean, other houses like Balenciaga were quietly thinking about similar strategies, but YSL was the first to announce and launch a completely separate line designed to be more accessible, more affordable, and available to a much wider market.
And to do that, you need a retail presence.
Of course. The first Rive Gauche store, dedicated entirely to this accessible ready-to-wear, opened in Paris in September 1966.
And the anecdote about his first customer.
Actress Catherine Deneuve. It just underlines how instantly his brand became interwoven with the new, sophisticated yet modern French cultural elite.
And that collaboration with Deneuve would go on to define cinematic style for decades. She was the ideal representation of the liberated, elegant woman he was designing for. You see it so clearly in films like Belle de Jour.
Absolutely. She was the perfect YSL woman.
And now, back to Le Smoking. Its introduction in the Fall-Winter 1966 collection. It wasn't just about borrowing from menswear. It was about celebrating the women who were already demanding it.
Yes, women like his muses, Niki de Saint-Phal and Danielle Lequette de Saint-Germain, they were already wearing trouser suits.
And the design itself was flawless.
Pristine. A masculine cut black jacket, a ruffled white shirt, and trousers. And remember, trousers were still highly controversial in many formal settings, even as they were gaining acceptance.
And the timing couldn't have been more impactful. It arrived right as the societal ground was shaking.
Particularly the 1968 student uprisings in France. The sources note that YSL, seeing the youth on the barricades wearing pants and practical clothing, was profoundly affected by it.
He famously said, in response to seeing the students, "They look beautiful. Fashion is not only couture, events are more important."
And that perspective led him to base his work more and more on what women were actually wearing on the street, rather than just on these abstract, top-down concepts from a design studio.
So his later designs really pushed the acceptance of trousers irreversibly forward. While Courage's made the initial breakthrough in '64, it was YSL's consistent, glamorous, and insistent presentation of pants and suits for women after 1968 that made them truly acceptable. Desirable, even, in almost all social and professional contexts globally.
This shift toward comfort and realism also started to permeate his own personal style. He embraced the relaxed look of the late 60s youth, letting his hair grow longer. And this relaxed aesthetic led directly to his first men's ready-to-wear collection in 1969.
And then the ultimate statement of personal style and marketing in 1971.
Yes. For the advertising campaign of his men's fragrance, Pour Homme, YSL posed for a striking, very natural-looking, nude photograph.
It was such a bold, personal statement of freedom and self-possession. It completely blurred the lines between the artist, the art, and the commercial product in a way that remains memorable to this day.
It really does.
Okay, we transition now into part 3, the 1970s. This was the undisputed reign of YSL, but it was also the years when the trauma of his past really caught up with him, ushering in immense personal struggle and retreat.
The sources all confirm this was his peak of global influence. Throughout the 1970s, he was almost universally regarded as the world's most prominent designer. His commitment to practicality meant he was constantly adapting his designs to the needs of the modern, busy woman, making sure comfort was never sacrificed for style.
His philosophy was so clear and so revolutionary for couturier, he said, "Daily life is where a clothes designer belongs today."
He got it. He realized fashion had to support the life of a productive woman, rejecting the old standards of just ornamentation over function. He really was the central gravitational force in fashion, even when contemporaries like Karl Lagerfeld or Jean Muir had brief periods of strong popularity.
But this relentless output, 4 collections a year, coupled with his increasingly turbulent personal life, began to show strain. It led to some creative controversies.
Yes, his spring 1971 collection, which was inspired by the fashion of the 1940s, proved highly divisive.
This one stirred up significant criticism, both historical and aesthetic.
Right. Some critics felt that focusing on 1940s styles was inappropriately romanticizing the period of the German occupation of France during World War II. It was an era YSL, born in 1936, hadn't personally experienced as an adult.
And beyond the politics, the look itself, square shoulders, short utilitarian skirts, was just deemed unattractive by many.
The reaction was visceral. The French newspaper François famously called the presentation une grande farce, a great farce. It showed that even a titan like YSL could misread the cultural mood.
Interestingly, that period of controversy seems to have triggered a conscious shift in his personal appearance as well.
It did. The sources detail that after the tragedy of losing a couple of younger friends to drug experimentation, YSL made a decision to step back from the less appealing aspects of that youth culture.
And by 1972, this translated into a dramatic change in his image.
He cut his long hair, he shaved off his beard, and he replaced his signature bohemian look of worn jeans and bare feet with these immaculately tailored gabardine trousers and precisely pressed shirts. It was a move toward a much more controlled, disciplined, maybe even safer public persona, a kind of protective armor.
Meanwhile, the economics of the house were changing irreversibly. By the mid-70s, the Pret-a-Porter line had completely eclipsed haute couture financially.
And this shift created immense tension for him. Amidst the criticism of that 71 collection, he actually threatened to abandon haute couture entirely. He even tried combining the couture and ready-to-wear shows for a bit, arguing that couture was becoming an obsolete marketing exercise.
But he reversed course. Why?
The sources suggest he was deeply concerned about the potential loss of the artisan's unique craftsmanship. The livelihoods of the people who depended on the rigorous, highly specialized work of couture, he felt a responsibility to them.
So he decided to maintain separate couture presentations.
He did. He recognized its vital role in preserving traditional skills, even if the revenue stream was dwarfed by ready-to-wear.
And this commitment, despite the financial realities, led to some of the decade's most memorable high-fashion triumphs.
Absolutely. The fall 1976 Russian peasant collection is a perfect example. He took the prevailing peasant silhouette, the bouffant skirts, babushkas, Cossack-style boots, and he translated it into this exotic, lavish luxury using the finest silks and intricate embroidery.
But the key was that even with all that lavish appearance, the garment still had comfort and freedom of movement. It still aligned with his core design philosophy.
Exactly. And then came the collection that literally defined the next decade, the spring 1978 Broadway suit presentation.
This is a masterpiece of foresight.
It is. YSL introduced wide, padded shoulders in his man-tailored suits. This one collection shifted the entire industry's silhouette dramatically. That look went on to become the single most recognizable stylistic feature of the power dressing and structured fashion of the entire 1980s.
He was, quite literally, creating the future of fashion before the calendar had even turned. But the strain of this immense creative pressure, designing 4 major collections every single year, it was compounding the precarious health struggles that originated back in 1960.
His personal life was becoming increasingly chaotic. In 1976, he and Pierre Bergé formally ended their romantic relationship, but they managed to make the extraordinarily mature choice to maintain their business partnership.
Which shows a commitment to the House of YSL that really superseded their personal difficulties.
It does. However, YSL's struggles with alcohol and drugs, which again, he directly linked back to that military hospitalization trauma, they intensified greatly in the mid to late 1970s.
The source material is quite painful on this. It details his erratic behavior, noting instances where he was so fragile or intoxicated that he could barely walk down the runway at the close of his own shows. Sometimes he had to be physically supported by his models.
His jet-set existence in Paris and New York is well documented. He was a fixture at elite nightclubs like Studio 54 and La Palace, environments that, facilitated heavy drinking and frequent cocaine use. His portrait was commissioned by Andy Warhol in 1972, cementing his place in that transatlantic celebrity culture.
And the sources also detail a particularly challenging and complex chapter involving a love triangle that drew in another key figure in fashion history, Karl Lagerfeld.
Yes. In 1973, Saint Laurent began a 6-month affair with Jacques de Bacher, who was Lagerfeld's long-term companion, and this liaison created intense professional and personal drama.
The sources indicate that Pierre Bergé acted decisively to end the affair in 1974.
He did. And following this, Bergé made some very serious accusations. He stated that both de Bacher and Karl Lagerfeld were responsible for exacerbating YSL's deteriorating mental health and for increasing his interest in hard drugs.
And we should be clear, we have to present this impartially. These were the deeply felt views of Bergé, protecting his partner during a time of crisis. It just highlights the incredibly high stakes and high drama in their circle.
It's a painful narrative thread. As his creative influence soared to these defining heights, his self-destructive tendencies also became more visible and more intense, and they were always tethered back to that initial, devastating institutional trauma. The brilliance came at a severe, visible cost.
Let's move to part 4, the later designs, final years, and enduring influence. This covers the 1980s through his death in 2008, a period characterized by refinement and eventually by retreat.
By the 1980s, YSL's aesthetic was heavily based on that big-shouldered, narrow skirt or trouser silhouette he'd established in 1978. And while it was very commercially successful, this period led to a debate among critics about his inventiveness.
Some fashion writers argued he'd lost his former creativity. They felt he was just perfecting and refining his existing classics. You know, the tight black leather skirts, the structured tweed suits of the early 80s.
But others welcomed it. They welcomed the familiarity, the refinement, the impeccable tailoring of these established codes. They saw him as the ultimate curator of classic style.
This era also marked a definitive shift in his target clientele, which reflected the broader social changes of the time.
It did. The sources indicate that as social inequality increased during the decade, his designs started to cater more explicitly to the wealthy ladies who lunch set.
Which is a sharp contrast with his earlier focus on democratizing fashion for the young, modern woman of the 60s and 70s.
It is. And he also began to neglect his prêt-à-porter lines significantly. He refocused almost entirely on couture, which held more personal meaning for him, despite its diminished economic importance.
And this neglect culminated in a very notable professional failure in 1987.
Right after the global financial shock of Black Monday, YSL presented a prêt-à-porter show that featured casual jackets priced at an astonishing US $100,000.
Wow, the timing.
The timing was terrible. The pricing was widely criticized as being completely out of touch with the new economic reality. After that disastrous show, he officially delegated the ready-to-wear responsibility to his assistants.
And the line suffered critically. The press soon dismissed it as boring and uninspired.
He continued to design his beloved couture until 2002, but this really marked the beginning of his professional retreat and his increasing reclusiveness.
Throughout all these shifts, though, his muses were the anchors of the house. They were the ones who defined the YSL woman for the world. And their variety speaks volumes about his broad definition of femininity.
You start with Victoire Dutroux, who bravely opened his very first show in 1962. Then there's Lulu de Falaise, the Anglo-Irish daughter of a marquis. She wasn't just a muse, she was the influential jewelry designer for the brand, bringing this bohemian, aristocratic flair.
Then Betty Couture, the half-Brazilian daughter of an American diplomat. He called her his twin sister in style.
She epitomized that relaxed, androgynous elegance. She was the perfect companion for Le Smoking.
And, of course, the enduring partnership with Catherine Deneuve, the definitive French actress who symbolized that confluence of cinematic elegance and high fashion. It was a connection that spanned decades and defined his public image.
And we have to highlight his pioneering work in diversity. Munya, a model from Martinique, was consistently championed by YSL. He often featured her as the final bride in his fashion shows, which is a position of immense symbolic importance in couture.
And Paloma Picasso, the jewelry designer, another key source of inspiration and collaboration.
So many incredible women. But beyond his muses, one external cultural force defined his life and work more than any other: Morocco.
His lifelong passion for the country began with his very first trip to Marrakech in 1966.
He spoke of it with almost religious reverence. That famous quote really encapsulates it. Everything was black before Marrakech. I learned color from this city. He just embraced its light, its intense, bold color blends, its passionate inventiveness.
And this passion translated into real estate. He and Bergé acquired several properties there, the most famous being the Majorelle Garden and Villa Oasis, which they purchased in 1980.
And that garden became his ultimate refuge, his creative sanctuary. It was the one place where he seemed to find a consistent sense of peace.
His final years were marked by a decline in health. He had brain cancer, and he died in Paris on June 1st, 2008, at the age of 71.
In a moment that really speaks volumes about the depth of their commitment, the sources detail that just days before his death, he and Pierre Bergé formalized their lifelong bond. They entered into a pacte civil de solidarité, a PACS, which is a same-sex civil union, recognizing their partnership beyond the professional realm.
And here we return to the profound sympathy and care that defined Bergé's protective instinct toward YSL. The sources reveal an extraordinary detail.
They do. When YSL was diagnosed as terminal, with only 1 or 2 weeks left to live, Bergé and the doctor mutually agreed not to inform him of his impending death.
Why?
Bergé firmly believed that YSL, weakened by decades of mental health struggle, would not have been strong enough to accept that knowledge.
It's an incredible detail that highlights the shared struggle of their relationship. It shows Bergé's fierce, protective love for a man whose fragility was as much a part of his identity as his genius.
His funeral was a major cultural and political event, befitting a national icon. He received a Catholic funeral at Église Saint-Roch in Paris. It was attended by the French president Nicolas Sarkozy, his lifelong muse Catherine Deneuve, and so many other global cultural leaders.
And following his cremation, his ashes were scattered in the place that had brought him the most creative joy and peace, the Majorelle Garden in Marrakech.
His legacy also generated one of the most significant art sales in history. The 2009 auction of 733 items from his and Bergé's colossal art collection. I mean, it included everything from Picasso paintings to rare Egyptian sculptures. It generated a staggering $342.5 million.
And the proceeds, demonstrating Bergé's ongoing commitment to philanthropy, were earmarked for HIV and AIDS research.
The sale set massive records, including a world record price for a Matisse painting. But the event was not without serious political and cultural controversy, focusing on two specific objects.
The two bronze heads.
Yes. The sale included two bronze heads, one of a rabbit and one of a rat, which were looted from the old summer palace in Beijing during the Second Opium War in the 1860s. The Chinese government attempted to halt the sale, viewing them as stolen cultural artifacts.
A French judge dismissed the claim, and the heads were sold for nearly $16 million. But the complexity deepened after the sale.
It did. The supposed buyer, who identified himself as a representative of China's National Treasures Fund, refused to pay for the objects on what he called moral and patriotic grounds.
So this refusal left the heads in a state of limbo.
Until they were eventually acquired by the French businessman François Pinault, who later donated them to China in 2013, finally resolving this highly sensitive political and cultural matter. The whole incident just highlights the intense intersection of art, wealth, and international politics that surrounded YSL's estate.
Beyond his personal collection, his influence is permanently enshrined in institutional memory all over the world.
The street in front of his Moroccan sanctuary was renamed Rue Yves Saint Laurent in 2010, and we now have two comprehensive museums dedicated entirely to his work and creative process. The Musée Yves Saint Laurent in Paris and the Yves Saint Laurent Museum in Marrakech both opened in 2017.
And in a way that completes the circle, his childhood home in Oran, Algeria, where he developed his earliest creative skills, was restored and opened as a museum in 2022. It displays period furniture, childhood photos, and those crucial early sketches.
And perhaps the ultimate statement of his connection to the broader artistic realm was the extensive Yves Saint Laurent Musée exhibition in 2022. It spans simultaneously across 6 different Parisian cultural institutions: the Louvre, the Musée d'Orsay, the Centre Pompidou, among others. It was a unique tribute demonstrating his lifelong ability to blend the commercial world of high fashion seamlessly with fine artistic expression.
So we've traced the trajectory of Yves Saint Laurent, the prodigious childhood in Oran, the genius at Dior, the founding of his revolutionary house, and the creation of a modern aesthetic.
And we've also seen the dark current of intense, self-destructive struggle originating from that profound institutional trauma of his youth.
His monumental achievements, the Met exhibition, the undisputed victory of Le Smoking, they stand in stark, often painful contrast to the intense personal suffering that defined his life. Suffering he himself attributed directly to that early, devastating military hospitalization. And so we leave you with this final provocative thought. Given that he revolutionized fashion by grounding it in comfort, in reality, and in the needs of the modern working woman, and knowing the specific agonizing origins of his deepest struggles, we have to ask, what might the ultimate scope of his creative output have been had he been granted a life free from that early, devastating suffering? And what is the true, hidden cost of a groundbreaking artistic legacy that emerged from so much pain?